to Oxford. And basically it was a week of academics giving lectures about human rights research. Some of it was, as you'd imagine, which is sort of stuffy white guys in suits looking like they teach at Oxford. Also, there was some of the most inspiring academics I've ever heard. There was an academic, a professor from Myanmar. His name is Min Min, and he was a political prisoner who was held in a political prison for 5 years, and he gave a presentation on the political situation in Myanmar, the relationship between China and the United States, and a call to nonviolence. And it was breathtaking how profound this teaching was. For our students, our Sonoma State students, they were blown away with Oxford in the way that you might be if you walked into this place, and you're going to learn here. And I would say that in the first couple of days, they were maybe a little tentative, like, do I belong in this space? I would just say that for me, it was evidence that privilege begets privilege, because after just 1 week of being in this beautiful space, receiving attention from truly brilliant minds of faculty, by the end of the week, our students were so much more confident, so much more self-assured, which was convenient because on the last day they had to present on a human rights issue that's closest to them. So I would say that our students at Sonoma State, I think they gave the best presentation. Whatever, Dartmouth. But one of the reasons our students, I think, gave the best presentation was because while other groups of students chose a human rights issue that they've heard about in the news, our students talked about what's going on in Roseland. And our students talked about what is egregious air quality conditions, what is public utilities that have yet to be fully realized in that space, and what is just, when you're surrounded by pavement, you know, like the temperature here, just from Bennett Valley, just even to where I live on the west side of town, it's usually 4 degrees warmer where I am. In Roseland, it's about 7 degrees warmer, right? So that's also a community where people don't have a lot of air conditioning. So just this idea of like what climate change is doing to certain groups of people. Our students gave a presentation on that, and then gave a presentation that included mentioning North Bay Organizing Project and other groups that are working to change that. It was really inspiring. Let's go to the next slide.
Did they know ahead of time that they were going to be, that this was going to be something they would have to do?
Yes, we did not spring a presentation on them.
Okay, so they prepared before they came.
So they knew ahead of time. I would love to say that I took credit and say like, oh, talk about a human rights issue that's close to you. But the truth is our student group was probably the most diverse. So except for one, all of the students who came to Oxford with us are students of color, many of whom are, all of whom are first generation college students, and many of whom are of different ages and have lived in Roseland for most of their lives. So they took it upon themselves to really connect this to their lived experience. Here are all the students, everybody who was at the Oxford Institute. So it was students from the East Coast, from England. There were some students from the University of the South in Tennessee, and then students from Utah and Oregon. Let's go to the next slide.
Lindsay, question?
Yeah.
Maybe I missed it, but how did you and these students get this invitation to go?
So, thank you, Gail. The dean at the School of Social Sciences, she has a name. Her name is Troy Carlton. She's connected. She got connected to the Oxford Institute and found funding. So all the students who went were paid for.
Okay.
She found funding at the school to take them, and then invited me along to build relationships with the Oxford Consortium staff and faculty, because Oxford is now trying to further make this consortium more available. So they're also hosting consortiums in the United States as well. So they're bringing their faculty over instead of flying all the students to Oxford. And Sonoma State will be hosting one next January over Martin Luther King Day weekend. Now North Bay Organizing Project and myself, in partnership with the School of Social Science, are going to help put on the programming and sort of connect the dots for students there.
Wow.
So that's I went to one, now I'm planning one. Okay, comes at you fast. Hey, here are our students. So there they are at the airport. That's the only time I found all of them together. They were connecting with other peers. So, and then it was Oxford, so we had to dress up. So you can see, we dressed up. I own a tie. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh,
I know.
You didn't do your clerical color.
I did not. After the dean at the Anglican church told me I wasn't a real clergy person, I was like, I'll just leave that at home. Okay, so here we go. I skipped ahead for Gail, but this is one of the things that's next, is this Oxford Consortium at Sonoma State in 2024. So this is where I feel like this is an appreciation for who Christ Church is, that we have this relationship with North Bay Organizing Project. So in Oxford, most of the focus on the human rights work is on what we would consider like human rights theory and academics. So people who have done research on human rights abuses and then are presenting on their research. There's an important place for that. I think the Academy has a role in, I don't want to say legitimizing, but in many people's eyes, things are legitimized when the Academy has studied it and presented it. I don't think that that's necessarily true, but this is the world that we live in. So if Oxford University is presenting on human rights abuses around the world, people will pay more attention than they would if it was just on somebody's blog or somebody's social media page, right? The focus for the Oxford Institute at Sonoma State. So while I was in Oxford, I had the opportunity to talk to faculty and say, this theory piece on human rights is really important, but theory without practice is dead, right? The Apostle Paul says this, faith without works is dead. I think theory without practice is also dead. And so this idea that students would actually learn how to make social change and learn very, very specific tools for both community organizing, advocacy, building a campaign, how to win an election, these sorts of skills that hopefully our students will be using very soon when they're leaders in our community. So that will be the focus of the Oxford Consortium that will be at Sonoma State over Martin Luther King Day weekend in January. I'll also be teaching the same class that was this semester. I'll be teaching that next spring as well. There are other ideas of how I'll expand and grow what I'm doing at Sonoma State. One of the reasons, though, it's taken me so long to present on this is that it's really difficult to give a presentation about birds that are still in the bush, right? So there are a lot of ideas about maybe what would be another iteration of this class, or could this possibly be a certificate program in community leadership, right? Is there like a mentorship or apprenticeship program where students could get credit at Sonoma State while doing advocacy work with North Bay Organizing Project? All of these things are like possible but not secure yet. So I only wanted to share with you in writing the things of which I am certain. So that's most of the iteration of my work so far. I'm happy to take questions. Let's go to.
What you just outlined is incredible, and what you're doing
is amazing. And I just wonder, is it only a quarter time?
That's a great question, Robin.
And I just worry because we want you here.
Yeah, sure. Those of you who've worked in school, right, you probably know how this goes. I don't think there's usually a week. I don't know that there's been a week where it's been 10 hours. But also there are several weeks throughout the year when it's no hours, right? So I am trying to keep track of it. And I think for the most part, it's evening out as this grows and develops. That might change, but this is also overlapping with the work I'm doing with North Bay Organizing Project. So ideally, things are sort of interwoven. That's my hope, Staff Parish Chair Robin Brown. The other thing I would say that I probably wouldn't share in my funding application to the annual conference is that, so my funding's been renewed for Sonoma State for next year. I'm not guaranteed to be reappointed at Christ Church for next year until annual conference, but they've already renewed my funding for the school that's 20 minutes away. So for my part, I feel really called to work in this county. I love working here. for me, developing this and doing this new ministry, there's a little symbiosis there. That it's not like I would pick this up and just necessarily do this in another school. My connections are at this school, so hopefully I'll be sticking around a while. Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
Lindsey, I still don't quite get the Methodist connection.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked.
It's not like a Newman Center that we had at Kansas State University. So maybe a little more on the connection.
That's great. So the organizing methodology that I teach, which most community organizers who you will meet in the United States teach this similar methodology. It stems from the school of Saul Alinsky. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him. He was a Jewish philosopher. He was many things, writing in the 20s, and his organizing principles around faith-based organizing are deeply rooted in both the Jewish concept of the healing of the world, but also this Christian concept of Christ being made alive, that the body of Christ is a body that gains power and works for the least of its members. It also delves a little into Marxism. We'll leave that there for a moment. That's at the heart of everything that I teach. So just to give you an example, one of the authors I've been having the students read is Paulo Freire, who wrote this book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it's gained new life. I think it was written in the 70s. It's gained new life recently because it acknowledges the sacred value of the individual in the work of the collective. This is a very Christian concept. Paulo Freire is I think he was excommunicated, but he was also a Catholic. And he talks about the 5 principles of organizing. And I'll skip to the last 2, which is that the courage to love as God has loved you, and faith in the people. And I would say that, so I had the students do this reading, and then we have a conversation afterwards. And they actually wanted to skip over the first 3 really quickly. And it was the students, not me, who really pushed to have this conversation on what it means to have the courage to love as God loves you. It was particularly like the male-identified, like cisgender, hetero male students who were the ones who wanted to talk the most about what it meant to have the courage to love, right? There are not a lot of spaces, I think, especially for this particular group of young men, to talk about what it means to love and to be loved. And that was most of I skipped over the other things I had in class because I thought this is the most important conversation we can have. What does it mean to love as God loves you? And one of my students who grew up Roman Catholic said, well, what does this love of other people, where does this relate to having boundaries and taking care of ourselves? Because God so loves the world that God gives of God's self. How much of myself do I give in this work? And the answer, of course, is all of yourself. And also, the answer is you have to take care of yourself and keep parts of yourself separate, right? And for me, that's a theological conversation. That's a spiritual conversation. That's also a conversation that, quite frankly, I have with students when I'm teaching confirmation. This is just happening at a different level. So I feel like conversations like that are a part of every class that I teach. I might not necessarily have that identified on the curriculum because I am now also an employee of the state of California. And we have those conversations. The Dean Carlton, she's an observant, she's a practicing Jew who actually is connected to Rabbi Irwin. And she shows up for these conversations too, right? It's not, I would say that the conversation isn't instructive in the way that a Newman Center conversation would be. There are other students of other faith backgrounds or no faith background who offer other perspectives, and that's fine. But overwhelmingly, these students are very hungry to talk about things that really matter, right? And they're very happy to pick apart and look at different aspects of faith. I would also just say this is especially true of my Gen Z students. So do we know what Gen Z is? These are the teenagers and college students now. I know people still are calling them millennials. I'm a millennial. They're now 20 years younger than me. They're their own generation. And I would say that Gen Z, I love Gen Z. They're so much cooler than other generations. And one of the things that is cool about them is that they actually expect difference. We're still trapped in this idea of modernity in some ways. They are post-modern. They do not expect there to be one answer. They don't expect there to be like one specific thing. So they're very open to difference. So I have a student in my class who's, he's from India and he's Hindu, and he loves talking about how things relate to Christianity. So when we were talking about the United Farm Workers movement, right, and Cesar Chavez, right, he marches to Sacramento. I don't know if anybody knows this story, but he intentionally marched in a pair of boots that were too small for him. So by the time he's approaching Sacramento, he has to take his boots off, and his feet are bloody. He's walking through the dust with these bloody feet, and he's mirroring Jesus. I mean, this is a brilliant strategic move. Good job, Caesar, right? It was my Hindu student who was most taken by that and just thought about what it is to lead the people in a way that gives part of ourselves, right? So I would say that's a great question, and it ebbs and flows based on how much I talk about that each week, but it's very much at the heart of this. And then students come to my office hours, and they talk about all sorts of things that I would consider pastoral counseling and spiritual counseling. And it's their time, right? I don't introduce that conversation, but they know that I'm a pastor, and they have questions about that beyond, why are you wearing that? Okay. Go ahead.
I'm wondering what kinds of curriculum materials you have for these students.
What kinds of curriculum materials? Are you talking about like authors? Are you asking if I do PowerPoint?
No, just, what are they dealing with in terms of, as a chemistry teacher, you always had the lab notebooks and
Sure.
so forth.
There are no lab notebooks. So I've created a reader for them.
Oh, okay.
I don't expect the students to buy any books because they, quite frankly, do not have funding to buy books. There's clapping, yay. So I buy the book. If I'm going to give them parts of the book and I'm going to copy it, then I'm going to do the work of getting permission to copy it and give it to them. A lot of I would say original source material. So I would consider Martin Luther King, that's an original source material. They've also read Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that's original source material. That's very easy to get, and I put that in a reader pretty quickly. If I'm using commentaries on that, I've had to get permission or buy things. But I create a reader for them. Most of it's all online now, so I also have a Google Doc with a reading list of everything I've been reading or I refer to in the class, so if they want to go back and look at it, they can. They also listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have them watch videos. So you can read great books about the United Farm Workers movement, but it's much better to just watch a video of Dolores Huerta running a meeting. Like if you want to be a boss, watch a boss, right? And so that's the piece where I think they're very open to different media, so they receive those things very well. And then they also give presentations, so I have them share their presentation notes with each other too, so they can learn from each other and reference each other later. Thanks, Van. And I do have a chemistry major in my class.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It just fit with her schedule, and she thought it sounded cool. Her line of questioning is always, it's very specific, right? Some of the other students are what you might expect. Criminal justice majors. We have an art history major, and then we have this chemistry major she's done all the reading. It's great to have her in the class, yeah. Others?
One other quick question. Does your course count as a general education class or just an elective, or not just an elective, but as an elective, or how does it fit into their overall curriculum?
That's great. So this class this year was an elective. The hope is within the next 2 years to develop this as part of a certificate program. So the students will receive a certificate in addition to their major that describes the specific skills that they're learning in classes. So this is where it's going to get kind of nerdy for a moment. Now, it's not just about the degree you have companies, organizations have caught on that having a degree does not necessarily mean that you have practical skills. So there's something called badging, which at first I thought was very cute because I thought it was connected to badgers. It's not. It's badges that demonstrate skills and abilities. So this would be a class that would help students. If you're hiring someone and they can lead a meeting, they have significant experience in public speaking, they've worked on a campaign already, those are skills that they'll be able to lift up on their resume. When I talked to the academics at Oxford about this, they were appalled. Felt like it had, sullied the purity of academia, but we know that students don't just go to college for the love of learning, but they also need jobs on the other side. So hopefully this will be a class that will be connected to that in the next couple of years. It's really helpful to be co-teaching with an administrator. So I'm telling you, we're gonna be doing this. I'm not actually gonna be doing any of that. That's what the dean will be doing. We'll be developing the certificate program and hopefully getting this as part of a credentialing process. So it'll be beneficial to students in addition to being, I think it is already beneficial, but it'll be very practically beneficial as well. Yeah. Let's go to Gail and then about wrapping up.
I'm thinking this is accomplishing a couple of goals for you. One is to actually start networking with the students that you were having a hard time doing. But I would think the other goal is it's really feeding you and the stimulation for you to stretch yourself. I think that's fantastic.
Thank you, Gail. I would say yes. It's this is a way to connect with students. It's been a way also to gain some legitimacy on campus. So I have an office, I have access to the internet now. These are not things you have if you're just somebody who's around on campus, but it is something that you have if you're a faculty person on campus. I think for me, just personally, I'm someone who benefits from not doing the same thing every day. And so this makes me more creative. I think this work makes me more creative, even just in planning worship and being here with you all, right? It's a cross connection. It's also just a really different role to be in. And so I enjoy it tremendously. I guess I would also just close by thanking you all and thanking Christ Church in general and thanking staff parish, especially for being so supportive of me taking this on. It is a new endeavor, and I think Robin's question was real about whether it's 10 hours or not. And also I feel like one of the reasons this is possible is because I know you all want to support students too. So it's been great to be able to show up with things like care packages. Also, when we collected stuff for the food pantry, I just love that this is a congregation where I was able to say, what the food pantry needs is feminine hygiene products. And I had my entire trunk was full of them, right? And I would just say that you all aren't squeamish about things, and also you show up when you say you will, and that means a lot. So that's helpful for me in building this relationship, knowing that you all support it. And my hope moving forward is that we find more ways to connect students with Christ Church and vice versa. So that's all that I had. Thank you all for being here. Thanks.